if you wake up whenever you want and you slept for 10 hours and you're lazy getting out of bed, I think that affects your whole life in a negative way. I really do. I think it's not good. And again, I know that some people are on those schedules, and I know that some people need more sleep. That's I understand that. There's some genetics involved.
If you got to drag yourself out of bed, doesn't that kind of indicate you need more rest?
Possibly.
But
you could be right. If you decide to sleep more, it's because it feels good, right? So
right.
Then it's good for you. Mm-hmm. But what if you want more candy? If you want more candy because it tastes good, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. In fact, it's not good. Right. But I do think that there's times that I do definitely need more sleep, but I don't. And I also know that there's a fine line. I know when I get overtrained. I know when I get not enough sleep, and I feel it, and my workout starts going backward, and my jiu-jitsu starts going backwards, and my life starts going a little bit backwards. Mm-hmm. And then I know, okay, you need to take a day, you need to relax, sleep more. Maybe
like wake up at like 5.
Yeah, sleep until like 5:30. And you could always tell that when we were training fighters for the UFC. You could tell when they reached their limit, when they were overtraining, it was so obvious. They would just fall apart on the mat, just completely fall apart. And the other thing is, I'm like making a big deal out of waking up early. There's millions of people in the world that's what their job is. They're a single mom and they got to work 2 jobs, and they're getting up earlier than I am, and they're going to bed later than I am because they're supporting their family. Right. So I'm not sitting here saying this is the be all end all, but I will say that it definitely has an impact, and it definitely affects the other things in your life. If you have that discipline early in the morning, it will help you across the board. And at the same time, I don't want to give the impression that I'm living this like task-driven life where I have every minute of the day scheduled, because then that does inhibit your ability to do other things. Right. It inhibits your creativity, obviously. But I'll train jiu-jitsu, and I'm going to go there maybe I'll just go there for 45 minutes and get some rounds in. Maybe I'll be there for 3 hours. And I don't necessarily know that when I show up, because I have some flexibility in what I'm going to do in the day. Yeah. The waves are good. Maybe I'll go surfing, but you're right that you have to be disciplined. It's not getting out of bed is like the foundation of the discipline. Yeah. And I think it carries over everything else, because when you get out of bed early and then you work out, when you get done working out, me personally, I don't want to eat junk when I get done working out. I'm like, I did a good workout. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling healthy. Instead of eating a bowl of Lucky Charms, I'm going to eat, some eggs and bacon and eat something good. But one of the things that I definitely think of as a driver of me is fear. And it's, fear of failure, fear of being overtaken.
What drives you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
What drives me.
Right.
And this comes from, I remember being in the SEAL teams. When I was a young guy in the SEAL teams, I was very afraid of making mistakes and looking stupid or doing dumb things and getting a bad reputation. And that fear got me to work early and got me to inspect my gear 3 more times, and got me to ask my buddy to inspect my gear to make sure we were good to go. So I think that's what the fear is. And then there's also the fear of what the enemy's doing and how hard are they training. And are you training harder than them? And now that I'm in the civilian world, I'm thinking, okay, what is some other company doing better than we're doing, and how can we overtake them? And that's some weird fear and competitiveness that everybody has. Some people more than others. You got to balance it for sure, but it's definitely one of those things. You know what? I actually got asked this at working with a company the other day, and they said, how much should we be focused? Because I said something along these lines. They said, well, how much should we be focused on what the competitors are doing? Yeah. And should we be afraid of them? Mm-hmm. And I said, actually, fear is the wrong word. You shouldn't be afraid of the enemy, but you have to respect them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that gets me out of bed early in the morning, is that I respect the enemy. I'm not afraid of them, but I respect them, and I'm going to be ready to do battle with them when the time comes. how do you develop mental toughness? How do you become more mentally tough? And, you know, you and I did that video on it where it's like, if you want to be more mentally tough, then be tougher. you know?
Yeah.
And you get these people that are out there that sell courses on developing mental toughness, and you know, they're either going to bring you into a room and get you into some spiritual state and say, okay, listen, you've got to visualize the mind of the wolf and you are going to see through the eyes of the wolf. What does a wolf do? The wolf does not back down. He leads the pack. And they're, you know, like all this stuff, right? Okay, I don't, you know, no, not my gig right there. Because the cool thing about mental toughness is it's just a simple choice that you have to make. Are you going to go through this thing that's hard, this thing that's tough, this thing that sucks? Are you going to suffer through it, or are you going to quit? It's really easy. You just go, okay, I'm going to suffer through it. I'm going to deal with it. Then you're mentally tough. Done. Next question. Let's move on to something more important. You know what I mean? That's that easy.
Do you ever remember a time that you were that you were straight up mentally weak? Do you ever remember any time? No.
1996, I was. No, I'm just kidding. You know, like, I'll tell you, people talk about in SEAL training. They say, oh, everybody wants to quit at some point during SEAL training. And I literally, not at all, never for 1 second did I think, oh, I'm going to quit. I don't want to do this anymore. Not even a chance. That's ridiculous.
Who says that?
SEALs say it.
Like other SEALs
say
say
it.
it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
You know, everyone thinks about quitting sometime. I'm like, no. And I got plenty of bros in the SEAL teams that never thought about quitting.
Me too. Yeah, two of my best friends. They said, no, you don't even think about
No,
quitting.
we didn't even think about quitting.
Yeah.
And so those guys are mentally tough. And okay, so if you're not mentally tough, if you view yourself as mentally weak, then you got to do things, I guess, push yourself to that threshold. Right. And how do you push yourself to that threshold? You do mentally challenging things, you do physically challenging things, and you push through them.
Yeah.
And then that might develop your mental toughness more. And
Just
this is
this
is the crazy thing about the SEAL teams is there's kids that grew up in, you know, some rich town with very wealthy parents and went to an Ivy League school, and they're tough. And there's kids that grew up with no dad and, you know, a single mom, and they're tough as hell. So that theory is almost debunked, because where does that mental toughness come from? And I'll tell you where I think it comes from. I think it comes from when a human being decides that they're going to achieve their goals and they're going to go through whatever obstacles, then that's where mental toughness comes from. It is a decision that human beings make to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that when...
You know what you're doing right now? You're shirking responsibility for mental toughness. That's what you're doing.
I'm trying to narrow it down.
You're basically saying right now, like, you weren't developed in a way that raised mental toughness, and it's everyone else's fault. It's your fault you're not tough.
I'm taking the exact opposite of extreme ownership of my lack of mental toughness, or former. I'm working on it. No, but I think it is a lot of environmental factors. Like, you become tough because of certain environments, for sure.
Yeah, I guess we would need to see what happens with the people that aren't mentally tough.
Right.
Because where do they end up? They end up in the gutter. They end up dead. They end up in jail. They end up in bad places because they weren't mentally tough. They didn't figure it out. They didn't drive through it. Mm-hmm. And so we don't even know who those people are. What happened to them? They failed.
They weren't mentally
They
tough.
didn't make that decision. They didn't decide that they were going to get out of that bad situation, that they were going to push through that scenario. Right. The guys that you played football with, they drove through those bad situations and got there. You know, that's how they did it. They decided to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, making that decision, I guess they would have to sort of access a place in their mind where that decision is final. Because a lot of times people say, yeah, I'm going to do this, and that's my dream, and, you know, I'm going to be an architect. And then when they go to college, when the beginner class is 3 hours a day for 5 days, they're, I don't know.
That's one thing that the SEAL training does very well, is gets rid of those people, because everyone that shows up there thinks they want to be a SEAL.
Right.
Until, 2 weeks into it, and then you've got half the guys, and then you end up with 20% of the guys.
Yeah.
And everyone has that dream when they show up there.
Yeah.
But that dream gets crushed. And at the end of the day, when you feel that weakness, it's a choice to make to overcome it. It's not that big of a deal. You just suck it up and do it. Let's go to the next question.
There you have it. What are some key mental and physical steps or patterns to stay on game?
Yeah, this is one of those questions that we got a bunch of very similar questions to this. What are the 5 key? And people always want to put numbers on things, especially
Right.
these days. I think it's people's
The
attention
list.
span. Yeah. People want to see a list of, okay, if I do this, and I guess it sells, right? What are the 5? In fact, they've done a bunch of articles about Leif and I, and they throw like a number on them. The 12 things, the 3 things.
Yes.
Because people want to believe that there's a finite number of steps to take. This is going to go back to what we've already been talking about. For me, waking up early, working out every day, taking ownership of what you're doing and responsibility of things that are in your life, making sure that you periodically throughout the day, throughout the hour, maybe not throughout the minute, but that you detach yourself from the situation that you're in. You detach yourself from it and you look at yourself and you assess. And I think that has a huge impact. And I talk about that a lot, that detachment, that it is something that I learned in the SEAL teams. And I learned it when bad things were happening. And if you get sucked into those bad things and you're in them mentally, emotionally, and physically, you can't assess well because you're in the problem. Yeah. It's like when you're watching a horror movie and they're like voluntarily, oh, there's a noise down in the basement. Let's go see what it is. Right. Everyone that's watching the movie that's detached from the situation is screaming at the screen, no, don't do it. Mm-hmm. The people that are there are saying, yes, let's go check it out, because they're emotionally and physically and mentally in the situation. So having the ability to detach from the present, from being inside your own head, being able to detach from that is hugely important, because it allows you to do a real assessment of yourself. And then finally, staying humble. You can't ever think that you've got everything figured out. You've got to constantly be saying, what can I do better? What can I fix? What am I screwing up? And people are going to give you advice, and you got to take it and listen to it and see if it's good or not, maybe put it to the test. But I think those things, waking up early, working out, taking ownership of stuff, being able to detach and assess, and staying humble, those are kind of my mainstays, if I had to call them out, on the list of 5 things that make you better. Because if you don't detach, it's very easy to be in your own head and say, well, Echo screwed up his part, and that's why we failed the mission. Right. It's because Echo didn't do his job. And now, but as soon as I hear myself saying that, when I'm saying it, it's okay. When it's coming out of my mouth, it's okay. Right. It feels but if I see myself saying it, then I know that I've gone the wrong way. Yeah. I know that I've made a mistake.
You can start practicing taking ownership of everything you possibly can, literally right now. And what I found and really like about it is that it works not just like with business, it works with everything. Relationships with friends, relationships with your wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, all that. It works amazing in all those situations. So it applies. It's really kind of like a staple for life, like a way to conduct yourself just in life.
Yeah, and that is why that became the title of the book, because that is the underlying characteristic that helps people in their life. And that means as a leader, of course, obviously, in a pressure situation, obviously, in a business, obviously. But you're right, and it takes transitions across the board to life, and it makes you successful across the board when you take ownership of everything, no doubt about it. When I think about what drives me, it's an extremely powerful force that's driving me today. And that is that I served with guys that sacrificed their lives so that we could be here, so that I could be here, so that we could have freedom, so that I could have, never mind freedom, so that I could be here alive. And when you think about that, when you think about this gift that you've been given to come back to America and be free and have a life and have liberty and be free for the pursuit of happiness. When you think about that gift, it's the most beautiful thing anyone could ever give you. It's been given to you. It's been given to me. And I will not squander that gift. And I will make every day count as I remember those guys that gave that gift to me. That definitely pushes me. And I don't want to let those guys down. The leadership principles do not change, regardless if it's in business or in battle. The leadership principles stay the same. And so if you're new and you're up and coming, what do? How do you step up into that role? Number one, be humble. I know it's a theme. I sound like a broken record, but everybody knows, everybody's seen that cocky guy that walks in and thinks they're going to run everything, and you just instantly disrespect that person. Mm-hmm. So how do you overcome that? You come in and you be humble. You respect people. You respect people regardless of what rank you are, regardless of whether you're making a ton more money than someone else. It doesn't matter. You treat everybody with respect. You treat them with respect, and they're going to respect you. You listen to them. It means so much when one of your people comes and talks to you, and you sit down and you say, okay, let me take some notes on what you're saying. That means so much to them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people forget that. They forget what it means to look up and see the boss man, and they might blow a guy off, or, hey, I don't have time for you right now. Mm-hmm. You got to listen to people, mm-hmm. because what you're trying to do in a leadership position, and this is a word that I've only recently become comfortable saying. The word is relationships. You are truly, that's what business is. That's what life is. That's what business is. That's what combat is. Mm-hmm. That's how you lead people in combat, in business. You have relationships with them. Leif and I talk about this all the time. Sure, I can give you an order if you're below me in rank, and you might do it some of the time, but you're not going to, the people that really follow you, that you have a relationship with you, those guys will do anything for you. Right. The guys that I worked with, the guys that worked for me, mm-hmm. were my subordinates. They do anything for me. And you know what? I would do anything for them. I would do anything for those guys. The guys that were in my task unit, those guys were awesome. They were awesome guys. And I would do anything for those guys. I would give them anything. And they would do the same for me. Why? Because we had relationship. That was what we had. It wasn't because I would order them to do something. That doesn't work. So you got to build those relationships. And how do you build relationships? How do you build relationships then? You build relationships by doing those things, by respecting people, by being humble, by listening, by telling them the truth, by having integrity and telling people the truth. You can't lie to people. And I mean, lie is a strong word, mm-hmm. because, I don't think people are generally lying to each other on a regular basis, but people use half-truths, and they shadow things, and you can't do that. And people see right through it. And even if they don't know what the truth is, they know they're not getting the truth. Right. So, I was always with my guys. Okay, here's what's going on. Here's the problem. Here's what we screwed up. Here's what we need to do better. Here's the pressure I'm under from higher headquarters. Here's why I'm under this pressure. I'm not sugarcoating it. I'm not trying to set something up to be different than what the reality is. If I'm getting told to do something that I don't believe in, okay, now this is a tough one. If I'm getting told to do something I don't believe in, I'm not going to go tell my guys, hey, I don't believe in this, and we're going to do it anyways. No. If I don't believe in it, I got to figure out why we're doing it. Right. And I'm going to say, okay, boss, I do not understand why we're doing this. I don't see how this is going to help us win the battle. So you need to explain this to me so I can explain it to my guys, because I'm not going to go lie to them. I'm also not going to go down there and say, hey, we're doing this anyways, or I'm not going to send people to do things that I don't believe in. We're all trying to win the war. My boss is trying to win the war. I'm trying to win the war. My guys are trying to win the war. So my boss isn't going to tell me to do something that doesn't make sense and isn't logical to win the war.
Yeah.
So I should believe in it.
Right.
And if I don't, then I should question him.
Yeah.
And those are the things that allow you to build relationships. And the topic of the night again, ownership. You know, if you take ownership when there's problems and you get them solved, and then when things do go right, you pass the reward and the credit onto your boys, then that also helps you build those relationships.
Yeah.
So that's what I would tell a new leader in the business world. Work hard. You know, I should have said that one's like number one. Work hard.
Work hard, yeah.
Balance. And I talk about balance all the time because all these things have to be balanced. And when you're talking about truth right now, you have to be tactful. You know, being truthful and being honest does not give you permission to be a jerk.
Right.
It doesn't do that. And so there's a difference between, you know, oh, I don't like Echo's shirt, so I'm going to say, dude, that's an ugly shirt, right? And just like when you're working with, you know, subordinates and they screw something up, you know, that was a horrible job. You let me down. No, okay. Hey, well, first of all, you want to take ownership of it. I obviously didn't give you good enough guidance. But the point that I'm trying to make is being honest with people. There's people that are blunt, honest leaders, and everyone hates them because they're so blunt. They don't have any tact. Right. They don't maneuver. They don't use jujitsu. They don't think, and they don't assess the whole situation. And they think that if I tell Echo, you know, if I want Echo to use method A, and Echo's used to using method B, Echo might have a personality that if I go up and say, hey, use method A now, I'm being blunt, I'm being frank. What does Echo say to that? Echo's like, dude, I've been doing this a lot longer than you. I'm not going to do method A. I'm sticking with my method. That's real. I need to get, you know, so you've got to influence people. You've got to be a chess player, not a checkers player. And so don't confuse being honest with being blunt and untactful and a jerk. You have to do jujitsu. And for anyone that's listening that doesn't do jujitsu is a very nuanced game where you're constantly trying to set things up and shape the situation. It's not like boxing. In boxing, I'm trying to punch you, you're trying to punch me. In jujitsu, you're trying to maneuver on the other person. You're trying to get better positions on them. You're trying to flank them and come in from a different direction that they didn't expect. That's what the art of leadership is. Anyone could go through a list of, hey, here's what you guys screwed up on the mission. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fix it. That guy's not going to be respected as a leader. Even though he's truthful and honest and blunt, it's not going to get him where he needs to be. Right. There's a whole nother game to
game
play.
Within
and
the game.
And it's dealing with egos and it's dealing with personalities. That's really what it boils down to. Everyone has different personalities, and learning how to be a craftsman that knows what tools to use with what different types of wood. That's what being a leader is.
Yeah.
If leadership was do these next 7 things and you'll be a great leader, I wouldn't have a book and I wouldn't have a business because everyone would be a great leader. There is an art to it. It is a very difficult thing to do. It's simple. There's simple steps, you know, be honest, you know, show integrity, take ownership. There's those simple steps, but at the same time, they're incredibly nuanced. Yeah. And that's what makes it challenging. And that's what makes it so rewarding as well. That is absolutely what makes it so rewarding. How do you deal with people that don't take accountability? How do you deal with leadership that doesn't get the message that you are communicating, right? So just so we can both understand very out of the gate here, both those questions, what do both those questions do?
What, this question?
Both these 2 questions, they have something in common. How do you deal with people that don't take accountability and people that don't get the message that you're communicating?
You're not taking accountability.
You're blaming these other people.
Yeah.
You're blaming them for not taking accountability, and you're blaming them for not understanding your message.
Right.
Whose fault is that?
Your own. If you're taking extreme ownership, that's your fault.
100% of the time. Yeah. So if I'm a leader and my people aren't taking responsibility for their actions, that's not their fault. It's my fault. I have not shown them how to lead properly. I haven't shown them how to take accountability. And how do you do that? Hey, if Echo does something wrong, I don't go, Echo, you screwed this up. I say, Echo, this went wrong. It's my fault that I didn't explain it to you well enough. I'm not going to talk to you, baby, but like, hey, what do we do wrong? How do we make this happen? You got to take ownership of it. And what does that make Echo do? That makes Echo say, oh, you know what? No, it was my fault. You know what I mean? So both those questions, how do I solve those problems? I take ownership of them. That's number one. Number two, what do I do? Because to take ownership of them isn't quite enough here. We need to be smarter than that. We need to play chess. So what I always try and do from a leadership perspective is I always try and understand the perspective that other people have. This kind of goes to detachment. I got to detach from my own head and I got to see it from their perspective so I can understand, what does it look like from Echo's viewpoint? What does it look like from my most junior guy that's not doing what I want him to do? Why isn't he doing it? What is he seeing from his perspective? Okay, my boss doesn't understand what I'm trying to communicate to him. Guess what? What is his perspective? How do I detach from my own head, see what his perspective is? Because once I see his perspective, I can adjust it.
Right.
So it's very important to try and understand other people's perspectives. And it's usually not that hard. People are often, pretty easy to read. And as soon as you leave your own head and get into theirs, you'll see how you can change the scenario and make them understand it better. So those are two big pieces. Pressure situations where emotions are involved and you start getting fired up. People are yelling, or there's, capital at risk, or jobs at risk, or lives at risk. It's definitely hard to do that. And guess what? Those situations where it's hardest to do are the most critical times where you need to step back, calm down, step outside your own head. Don't see the emotions. Let your ego go. Understand other people's perspectives. That's when you need to do it the most.
Yeah.
Oddly enough. I was in the SEAL teams for 20 years, and it was awesome. I can't even call it a job because it was so fun and surrounded by great guys. And even overseas in Iraq, I was having an absolute fantastic time the whole time. Obviously, those were the best days of my life, being a combat leader in a combat situation. That's what I wanted to do my whole life. And when I was there, I knew that. And those were the best days of my life. And encompassed inside those great days are obviously the worst days of my life. And no doubt the worst days of my life were the days when my guys got killed. And Mark Lee, first SEAL killed in Iraq. Mikey Mansour, second SEAL killed in Iraq, who was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for jumping on a grenade to save 3 of our other teammates. And Ryan Jobe, who was severely wounded, blinded in both eyes after he was shot in the face, who made it home. And eventually, after his 20-second surgery to repair the damage that would have done to his head and face, he died as well. And the day that was the absolute worst was when I came home from deployment and I didn't have those guys with me. And I was coming home to my family, to my kids, to my wife, and they weren't. And how it affected me as far as my military career goes, I truly understood what was at stake in combat. And when I took over training out on the West Coast, I was obsessed with making the training as realistic as possible and getting the guys that were going overseas to Iraq and Afghanistan, getting them as prepared as they could humanly possibly ever be to be in these worst case scenarios. And I remember we'd set up these scenarios that were very, very difficult. I mean, unbelievably difficult. Like, you were going to have massive challenges. And I remember I'd see a guy, like, for instance, in an urban environment in training, I'd see a guy standing in the middle of the street, like, which you would not want to do if you were in Ramadi in 2006. And I would get this feeling, a sick to my stomach feeling, because like in the back of my mind, I'm waiting for rounds to start hitting the ground and kill this guy or wound him. And I would, get fired up and, explain to him, listen, you got to move from cover to cover. Don't be standing out here in the middle of the street. Why there's no cover fire going on, And that's how it affected me as far as my military career and how it affected me in my life. I've already told you how it affected me. Those guys, I'm trying to honor them by living the best life I can and taking advantage of the freedom that they blessed me with.
Mm-hmm. How'd you come to know the darkness, and how does it motivate you dealing with it and using the light to win?
Is this a Star Wars question?
Kind of. On Tim Ferriss' podcast, you were talking about the darkness and the light.
No doubt about it. It's definitely something that I think about, and the world is an evil place, and there's a lot of evil in the world. There's pain, there's suffering, there's disease, there's evil, there's war. I mean, there's bad things in the world. Mm. And sometimes people ignore those things. And we talked about this with Joe Rogan quite a bit. We can live in a bubble here in America where there almost is no pain, and there almost is no suffering, and there almost is no violence, and there almost is no evil. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, I've always stepped outside that bubble and looked and seen what the rest of the world is like. And so I think that's a counter to what a lot of people believe the world is like. And so for me, that darkness is always present. It's always there. And at the same time, there is light. And there is people that are incredibly generous, that sacrifice greatly, that give everything they have to serve other people. Doctors, nurses, firefighters. There's all these people, teachers. I mean, there's just people that do all they can to help other people and to do good in the world. And so I think that's what I try and balance in my mind. And I don't want people to think that I sit around and brood all day about the darkness, because I don't, I mean, I love to have a good time and laugh and smile. And I want to do that, but I also, in those moments, I'm definitely thinking that, we're lucky to be here. I'm not trying to convert people and make people think things and and I'm definitely not going to expend a bunch of energy diving into things that are not worth diving into.
Yeah.
With conspiracy theories, you can tie anything to anything if you want to. I mean, any major global occurrence that's happening will be tied into the rest, into some way to Kraft macaroni and cheese. I mean, there will be a connection to Kraft macaroni and cheese if you dig deep enough. There'll be an employee, there'll be a purchase, there'll be a plant, there'll be a farm, there'll be a sales, there'll be a stock, there'll be some connection between that and whatever incident that happened on the globe. And if you want to formulate those and tie those pieces together, you can do it because the world is connected. And when people say, oh, this corporation was involved in some way with this incident in this war taking place, you say, well, yes, there are big giant corporations that have huge interests around the world, and they're going to protect those interests, and that's what the world is made of. So I don't do a lot of debating about conspiracy theories, no.
There you go.
Somebody sent me a link to like a video about 9/11, and I clicked on it, and it was something like 8 hours long.
What, the video?
The video was 8 hours long about, and I just thought, well, okay. Again, if you want to, you can connect anything to anything if you want to. That's the way the global world is, the global economies. It's the way things are.
Did you watch the whole video?
I watched until I saw it said 8 hours.
Do you have any friends that aren't that aren't military and that are not jiu-jitsu or MMA guys?
Yes, I do. Mostly musicians.
All
I shouldn't
right.
say mostly musicians. Surfers. I got quite a few friends that surf.
Mm-hmm.
I surf out here in California, and I got some friends that play music, and we rock and roll.
Yeah, and that's something that I actually forgot. I knew obviously I knew that you surf, but that you play guitar.
Yes.
Weren't you like part of a band or some crazy
Yeah, well,
stuff?
I was in bands my whole life when I was growing up, when I was a kid. What's interesting is and these are some other, like, I know some guys that are surfers and musicians and artists, and I want to bring some of those guys and talk to them because they have different outlooks on things and how to get good and what kind of discipline it takes and what drives them. I mean, like you said, surfing is challenging. Surfing is cold. It's wet. It's dark. It's sketchy sometimes. And guys that do that their whole life until they're 70 or 80 years old. It's pretty awesome. I mean, to kind of close this out as the last question of what do you tell people, or what do I think is a helpful kind of lessons learned to close on? And I think one conversation I had with one of my guys, who was just a complete awesome warrior, named JP. And JP, how you doing, brother, out there? When we were going through training to get ready for Iraq, and when you're going through SEAL training, you learn all this information, and they teach you all these things, and you layer them on top of your brain, and there's layers and layers and layers of these tactics and techniques and procedures. And the layers can get so thick that you lose contact with the ground. And so we were out in training, and I was looking at JP, who is a stud. And it was one of those situations where we're out in the desert, but there's rocks and there's little shrubs and all that. And he was standing up in the wide open. because he was staying in the formation of the patrol, the way that he was taught and the way that he had been indoctrinated is one of those layers. Is you're here and you stand here and this is your field of fire and you watch this area. But what he'd forgotten was that you're standing in the middle of an open area. Don't stand there. Move to this little rock and then move to this little shrub and then move to this little, so that way if a bad guy looks, he's not going to see you. And if he does see you, he starts shooting, you have a place to hide. And I said to him, I said, JP, my brother. And he's like, what's up, sir? I said, hey, man, if you were 10 years old right now and we were out playing army out here, would you stand in the middle of this open trench right here? Would you stand here? And he's like, no. And I said, well, where would you stand? He said, I'd go over there to that rock right there and I'd get behind that. And I said, so your 10-year-old brain is doing better job moving from cover to cover than your 23-year-old brain. And I said, listen, your instincts, you know what the right thing to do is. You know what it is. Do it. And he did. And it was amazing. And I think that people, you, me, everyone, people listening, people that communicate with us, you know what the right thing to do is. You know what it is. You know it's be disciplined. You know it's work hard. You know it's put your ego in check. You know these things. You just got to do them. You just got to do them. And I think we close it out with that.